Homemade pasta, is it as complicated as people think it is? The good news is, no it's not. It is one of the simplest things you can do. And if you've never ever made homemade pasta, sometimes doing the research, looking online, all the different options and different ways of doing it can feel a bit overwhelming, and you can come away thinking, well, what am I supposed to do? Because there's so much conflicting information. Should you use just yolks? Should you use whole eggs? How much flour to egg? What type of flour? Should I use oil? Should I use water? Should I put salt in my pasta? Well, we're going to address all of those things today and leave you with all the information you need to really simply make your own homemade pasta. Let's go. Hello, it's Carl here, the Have a Go Homesteader, and today we're going to be having a go at making pasta. If you have flour in your kitchen and an egg, guess what? You can make pasta. You can do it today, and I'm going to show you how. But when you Google these things online, you're going to maybe come away more confused than confident. At least I did the first few times when I was first looking into this, because there's so many differing opinions about what type of flour to use, about what ratios to use, whether you're looking at weight or volume ratios online, you know, and we're going to hopefully demystify all of that and really simplify the process and explain some of the science behind it as we go. And then you can understand which recipe you want to use to make pasta and how you can do it and what your options are and what really matters and what doesn't. And the good news is pasta making is actually really forgiving. And you wouldn't be alone if you were a little bit confused about it, because even top chefs, they'll give you differing opinions and they'll disagree over things like kneading times and resting times and how you go about the process. Well, we're going to talk about all the options and what they mean so that you can decide how you want to do it. But the bottom line is, it's super simple, and you're going to be confident enough to go away from this video and make your own pasta 100%. So let's talk a little bit about what equipment you might need to make pasta. Well, we've all heard of pasta machines, and I've got one. Here it is. And this machine cost me, I think, around £20, actually less than £20. They're incredibly affordable, but don't worry if you don't have one. All you actually need is a rolling pin. That's it. This is the only piece of equipment, as well as a surface that you can work on, that you need to make pasta. Now, in September, I undertook a September self-sufficiency challenge where I started making my own pasta. First time I'd ever done it. I didn't have a machine, and if you want, you can go back and watch me making it there with nothing more than a rolling pin. It really is that simple, and I'm going to talk to you about how you can do it without a machine as we go through the process. So when I start using my machine, don't worry if you don't have one, you can still do all the same steps I'm going to do, just with a rolling pin. Now, if that's the case, Carl, why have you gone and bought yourself a pasta machine? Well, what I will say is the rolling process is a little bit time consuming and a bit of hard work, and this just makes it so much easier. It takes a 10-minute job and turns it into a 30-second job. So that's why I've got a pasta machine, and it also enables me to cut really thin pieces of spaghetti. But don't worry, you can also shape the pasta and make tagliatelle, linguine, and all those things without it. So I'll talk about how you do that and show you how to do that as we go. So different pasta recipes will call for different types of ingredients. But all you really need to make pasta is flour and water. And that's because when water and flour combine, that's how you can make glutens. And glutens are basically the proteins or networks of proteins that give pasta and bread that stretchy texture and bite. And getting that right level of development is the key to fresh pastas. Now, having said that you just need flour and water, we're going to be using eggs, and that's where we're going to be getting most of our water from. Egg whites are mostly water, so we're not going to be using tap water, although theoretically you could. However, if you do just make a flour and water pasta, it's not as tasty and it will tend to look a little bit insipid, and the flavour is more bland. So we're definitely going to be using eggs. So next up, let's talk about different types of pasta. Now, when you see a pasta recipe, generally, you're going to see it refer to one of three types of flour. It's going to be either a plain flour, like a general flour, an all-purpose flour, something like that, or it's going to refer to a semolina flour, or it's going to refer to a 00 flour, or sometimes called pasta flour. Well, that's what I'm using today, and here it is. You can see 00, this is what we're going to be using. But truth be told, there's very little difference between this and a plain flour. And up until now, I've been using strong bread flour to make my pastas with great results. So ultimately what I'm trying to say is whatever standard flour you use in your kitchen, that's the one that I would recommend you just have a go with and carry on with. And if you wanted to try something different, you could buy some specific 00 pasta flour. So if you're using this really fine flour, then you're just going to get like silkier noodles and things. So it's good for things like spaghetti. But honestly, I would just use plain flour if I didn't have this, and I'd be quite happy. And chances are no one would even notice the difference. Semolina flour tends to add what would be described as a rougher, heartier texture to your pasta, and that can sometimes help with more robust sauces and helping them to cling to the pasta. But ultimately what you need to think is that whatever flour you've got, that's the right flour to use. The goal is to make pasta. Right, so the other thing I haven't mentioned that you might want is a set of scales, but you don't even need those. For this recipe, I'm going to give you actual measurements, but as you'll see when we're mixing and when we're making our flour, that you don't really need them. You can do it all just by having a look and a feel of how the dough looks, because even with our measurements, I might find that I need to add a little bit more flour or add a little bit more moisture, because we all work in different environments and the humidity here might be different than it was the last time I made it, and all these things will make a little bit of a difference. But that's not to say that it's complicated. It's really, really not. And there are some really easy ways to test if your dough needs a little bit more flour or a little bit more egg or whatever it might be. But we're going to start with 300 grams of flour. And this is going to make between 4 and 6 servings of pasta. And then we're literally going to just pour that out on the countertop. So there's our 300 grams. The next thing we're going to do is get our eggs. And for this, what we're going to use is 2 whole eggs and 2 egg yolks. So we'll crack them into a mug. And these are large eggs that I'm using. And to get our egg yolks, we're going to save the white in this mug here. Nothing goes to waste. The easiest way of separating a white from a yolk, if you don't have any equipment, I've actually got a lovely tool that does this for me that I thought for the sake of this video, I'll show you. You just take your 2 halves of your cracked egg and you basically just pour the yolk from one to the other across the top of another container. And that will separate your yolk from your white. Really simple. Just going to whisk them up together until it's all one colour. Now the last thing we're going to add insofar as ingredients is a little bit of salt. Now you can find lots of different opinions as to whether or not to add salt to your pasta. Now you can add salt to the water. Of course you can do that, and that's going to salt your pasta for you. But to my mind, there's absolutely no reason not to add it now. So I'm going to add a little bit of salt, and if you're a weights and measures kind of person, I would suggest between 5 and 7 grams would be the right amount for this much pasta. But of course, everybody's tastes vary. I'm just going to add what I'm going to consider to be a really good pinch. And then we just pour that egg into that well. And then just move it around. Let the egg naturally just pull in the flour from around the edge. This will take a little while, but before long you'll see that in the middle it will start to not look like a load of runny egg, and it will start to look more like a dough. And then we just carry on like this, gradually introducing more and more flour into our egg as we go. And then once your egg is solid enough that it's not going to run away from you, then you can start just tickling in the flour around the outside with your free hand. But you don't want to rush it, take your time. Sorry about my wobbly bench here. It's the best way I've got of setting up the filming. There will come a stage before too long now when you'll just feel like it's not moving around as well this way, and then you're going to start moving to kneading, and we just want to get all of that flour in and mixed. That's starting to become a dough, and then we can start kneading it just like we would any other dough, and we can use the dough to collect in the loose flour from around our board. Now I have one extra little kitchen gadget which is really useful. I use it all the time when I'm making sourdough, and I'm going to use it now. It's called a dough scraper. But again, you don't need one. They're not essential by any stretch, but they're just helpful for reducing mess and, you know, keeping things a little bit tidier. So I'm going to go and grab that. So this is my dough scraper. They're incredibly cheap. I think this one was about £1. And as you can see, they just make it a lot easier when you're working with dough like this to keep your work surface a little bit tidier, and they help for scraping that dough off the surface. But if you don't have one, you can do it without. Just use the back of a spoon or your hands or whatever works for you. Now, when you get to this stage, you might think, well, it's all looking a bit dry. Please don't rush to add any moisture to it. There will come a time where we might decide that we want to add a little bit of moisture to our dough, but don't rush to make that decision. But now, the next stage is just to knead. And we want to knead this for about 10 minutes. And as I knead this, it will gradually incorporate all of those loose bits of pasta. So to knead it, I'm just using the heel of my hand and just stretching it out and then folding it back over itself. As I stretch it, stickier parts of the dough will open up, and then you can use them to capture the last remaining bits of your flour. Now, it can look quite dry at this stage. Like I said, don't worry. It will incorporate all of that flour, I'm sure. But if it doesn't, we'll know. And now's not the time to make that decision. It's not the most pleasant bit of the process. You know, it does take a bit of work, a bit of effort, and you want to knead it for about 10 minutes because kneading is really how you're going to end up with that perfect pasta, by stretching all of those glutens in it. And it's virtually impossible to over knead your pasta. So now it is just knead, knead, knead. And by kneading, I'm just working it with the heel of my hand and then folding it back over on itself. And this is going to take about 10 minutes. So the easiest way to knead it once it's all formed a ball is just, I think, to move the dough and pick it up and put it on end and then push your heel down into it like that. And I can feel it starting to become more flexible, giving a little bit. And I'm just going to work it around my wobbly bench to incorporate those crumbs of dough that are still loose. But now is the time at which, if your dough is still sticky at this point, then it's probably a little bit too moist and you might want to add a little bit more flour. And you do that just by sprinkling a bit more flour on it until it's, you know, this is really, really dry on the outside. It's not sticky at all. And equally, if your dough was now too dry, that it was still sort of, I've been kneading for probably 3 or 4 minutes. And after 3 or 4 minutes of kneading, if it was so dry that it was crumbly and flaky, then you might want to consider adding some more moisture. Now, you can do that in the form of water, if you absolutely need to, or you can do it in the form of a tiny bit more egg. Now, I would tend to add a tiny bit of the egg white that I've saved. Or you could just add a tiny bit of water, but you really want to keep those quantities to a minimum. And we're starting to really see some progress here. That outside is becoming more and more shiny and sheer and clean. It's not shiny yet, but it's getting there. Now, I've said you can't over knead your dough, and while that's true, you can have it out for too long. You don't really want it out any more than the sort of 10 or 15 minutes that you're going to be kneading it, only because it will start drying out, and that's not what we want. So I'll just reiterate, you only want to add water if your dough literally, it won't stay together, it's all crumbly. Otherwise, you're okay. And you want to get it to the point where the texture feels like glue tack, I suppose. So it's fairly firm still, but it is quite stretchy. And I can feel that this is, you know, stretching nicely. Okay, we're pretty much there. That looks perfect to me. So as you can see, it's got lines in it where we've kind of creased it together and folded it together, but it's also, when it's in a ball, it looks like it's one surface. That there, I'm very happy with. So the next thing we're going to do is wrap this in some cling film. We want to keep as much air out of it as possible because we need to let it rest. But this is also the time at which, if you wanted to pre-make your pasta, this is the point at which you could also put it in the fridge or the freezer. You could put this in the fridge and it will be fine in there for 2 or 3 days. The only thing with putting it in the fridge is the colour. It will start to grey. This won't affect the flavour, and it will still be absolutely fine and safe to use for a few days, but it just doesn't look quite as nice. You could also put this guy in the freezer and just defrost him when you're ready to use it. So it does open up the world of maybe making bigger batches. This is going to be about as much as I want for my family for one meal. So we're going to eat this for our tea this evening. But what you could do, you could make twice the amount and put half in the freezer so that next time you don't have to go through this first stage. But just be warned, you know, it's quite a lot of work, that kneading, and this is about as much as I enjoy doing. I don't enjoy doing much more than this. That there is now ready to rest. Now resting is its whole own subject that we need to talk about. Now what we've been doing for the last 10 minutes or so of kneading is we've been stretching the glutens in here. Now just like when you cook a steak and all of those muscle fibers tense up, the reason we rest it before we serve it is to allow them to relax again. Same when we're carving a joint of meat. Now, we need those glutens in there to kind of do the same thing. We've been pulling them, and they're really, really stretched out, and they're under lots of tension. So what we need them to do is just relax a little bit, which resting will allow to happen. Now, you'll hear advice on resting this in the fridge. You'll hear advice on resting this at room temperature. You'll hear advice on resting this for 10 minutes and for 6 hours. Well, I can tell you that it doesn't make a huge amount of difference so long as you've allowed it to rest for a little bit. If I were to roll this right now, it would become a little bit gnarly looking. We wouldn't get that really lovely sheer edge that we want to our pasta. So long as we rest it for at least 20 or 30 minutes, that problem goes away. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to literally just let this sit on our countertop at room temperature for about 20 minutes, then we're going to roll it. So there we go, our dough's been resting for about 20 minutes. Now another thing to rest it for, another advantage of doing that, remember what I was saying about how the glutens are all stressed out and under tension and want them to relax? Because otherwise what's going to happen is when we come to roll it, we'll roll it out and it'll shrink back in again. And particularly if you're using a rolling pin, that will be a real pain. And that's one of the reasons why it takes so long to do with a rolling pin, because you will roll it, and even after you've rested it, this will still happen to some degree. You'll roll it and it'll kind of try and shrink back a little bit to its former size. Anyway, we're not going to be using a rolling pin, we're going to be using our pasta maker. And like I say, it's just a great labour-saving device. Now, I'm going to take about a third of our dough, and we're going to run that through our machine, and we'll do the next third and the next third. Now you can make any type of pasta you like from this. We're going to be making tagliatelle. We've got settings on the side here, and they're just thickness settings, and we're starting on the thickest setting that it has. So we're going to run our dough through on the thickest setting, just like this. And you can see the difference between this machine and a rolling pin. It's just a lot easier. Then we're going to fold it over. This is called laminating. So we're going to fold it over like this. And you're going to want to laminate it 2 or 3 times as you roll, which again is going to just add to the consistency of your finished product. So we're going to run it through at this depth 3 times. Then we're going to laminate it again. And laminating it, you just fold it. So there's 2 ways of doing it. There's a 2-fold method, which is like that, which is what we did the first time. Then a 3-fold method, which is you bring it in like that, and then like that. So like I say, this is still on the widest setting, but our pasta is becoming more and more silky and smooth every time we do it. And the laminating, by folding it like this, it just helps you to get square edges and make it all more uniform. Right, so that's the last laminating we're going to be doing. We're going to run it through 2 more times on this setting. So that's 1, 2, and now 3. And then we're going to start bringing that setting in. So at the moment we're set on the widest setting. We're going to bring that in just 1 space to number 2. And we're going to run it through this depth again 3 times before narrowing it again. And most machines, I'm led to believe, have about 8 settings, and what size you want to set it to is going to depend on what sort of pasta you're making. So if you're making ravioli, you're going to want it on not the thinnest setting maybe, but the next one back, because when you make ravioli you're going to double up the pasta in places, so you want it fairly thin. If you're making lasagna, you might want it one back again from that, and the same with linguine and spaghetti. But again, it's all down to personal preference. What I'm showing you now, what I'm doing with this machine, like I say, you can do this with a rolling pin. It's just quite labour intensive. So we're going to bring this in another notch now, and we're going to run this through twice at this setting. And you'll see this front end is getting a bit strung out, so I'm just going to fold that over a little bit and we'll run it through at that same setting. Now we're going to move it down to number 5, number 6, and then number 6 is actually where I'm going to stop, because for our tagliatelle I think that's going to be perfect. So we're going to run this through one more time at number 6. There we go. Now I am going to cut this in half now, because that's some really long pieces of tagliatelle there. So we're going to cut this in half. And then we're going to run it through the other side of our machine. So we just take our crank out, pop it in there, and we're going to now turn this into tagliatelle. I'll bring you a little bit closer. Now how's that? So we're just going to give this a dusting of flour to stop it all sticking together. And then that's ready to sit in our bowl to be cooked for dinner for this evening. Now I've mentioned all the way along that you don't need this equipment, and you really, really don't. You can make this with a knife, but you can imagine that it just takes a long time cutting all of these strands, but there's nothing to say you can't do it. And what I really want to get across is that you can have a go at doing this. You can make your own pasta with what you've already got in your kitchen. You really, really can. And when it comes to cooking, this isn't going to want nearly as long as the dried pasta that you buy in the shops. It's a completely different product. This is going to want to go into boiling water and cook for about 90 seconds, a minute and a half. That's going to be my recommendation. And what you're going to have is probably the best pasta you've ever eaten. If you've only ever eaten shop-bought dried stuff, this is going to be a marked difference from that. So you can see here that I'm able to tease it all apart quite easily. Adding that flour, just a little sprinkle like that, makes all the difference. I'm going to carry on and make the rest now. So there you have it. I'm going to put this cling film back over the top just loosely, and then a tea towel. We're going to pop that in the fridge, and that's going to be our tea. We're going to have that with some ham and some cheese sauce, and that's going to be my family's dinner this evening. So there you go, homemade pasta demystified. Hopefully you can go away and make your own now and not have any worries about how it's going to go. The thing to bear in mind with pasta, just like sourdough starters, they're so forgiving that you can get it wrong and it's going to be okay. If at any point your dough is a bit wet, you can make it a bit drier by just adding some flour. If it's a bit dry, you can make it a little bit wetter by adding some water or some egg. So, you know, you can always salvage it. It's really, really forgiving. If you let it rest too long, that's fine. If you put it in the fridge too long, that's fine. It's still going to taste just fine. So please do have a go at it. Remember now, obviously I use this pasta maker. You don't need one. If that's going to stop you doing it, just make it without. Use a rolling pin and a knife. That's all you need to do. And once you've done that, you've made your own pasta once, and you decide it's something you're going to make regularly, then definitely 100% invest in a machine, because like I say, they're just a great labour-saving device and they're not very expensive. So please do go out and make some pasta and let me know about your pasta making in the comments. I genuinely love hearing from you guys. And also, please make sure if you've enjoyed this video, press that like button. It does make a big difference. And leave me a comment down below. If you're not already, make sure you're subscribed to my channel. This is just the latest in my Have a Go Homesteader series, where I'm taking on lots of different homestead projects. Some I'm very familiar with, some are new to me, and I'm sharing them all with you guys. Thanks ever so much for watching. I'll speak to you really soon. Cheers.